This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hello, my friend. Welcome to A Time to Care, the Caregivers podcast. I'm Isabel Melgarejo, your host, and I'm so delighted to be here with you talking about the caregiving journey. Have you ever felt that life just happens to you? So we're going to dig a little bit into that today. So let's get started. For the longest time, I've always heard start with the end in mind. When I was a project engineer and I was managing projects, we would always start with clients understanding what they want. If they were building a new complex, a new factory, or a new office building, whatever it was, we were understanding what they wanted and what the project needed. And then I became a professional organizer. The first thing that we would talk with clients was about what they wanted from their space, what they wanted to achieve through organizing their space, what they wanted in their homes. I worked with older couples that they wanted to repurpose rooms. Some of them wanted to get rid of stuff and clean in a more environment, and that's what they hire you. But going deeper is very important in those cases because what you decide to keep and what not makes a huge start. I was part of this mastermind, and for whatever reason, a lot of people were interested in their clothes. So the coach that I was working with back then, she's a bear coach. Actually, she's the founder of Bear Coaching, which is a program to love your body. And she was like, well, how does the woman that you want to be, how does she dress like? Every time and for every project, we see that we start with the end in mind. Books, like if you've ever written a book, they are written before we determine, writers or movie creators, they all start defining who the characters are and what's going to be the plot, and then they write about it, or they record whatever movie. They film and they don't record. But for all of these projects that we have in mind, we create something before it happens. We see this everywhere because that's the end goal. And even though we see that everywhere, and we practice that everywhere. And we do that all the time, either in a personal way or a professional way. We keep setting goals and then walking towards those goals. We don't do that for our caregiving journeys. We just don't. We're just thrown into that position and then we just keep rolling with the punches for the most part. We rarely stop to think what we want for that role. Definitely, I never thought about how I wanted that role to be. It never occurred to me until I was pressed in a situation that I either had to change or I was seeing a lot of huge risks that I could prevent. So I took action. But I was pretty much rolling with the punches the whole time for 20 years. And I see a lot of my clients going through the same situations. They just roll with the punches. This is happening, and then I act accordingly. I take action, I do the things that need to happen, everybody's happy. What if we were to start the journey with the end in mind? And by that mean, how do you want that role to be for you? Maybe you don't even want to have that role. And if that is the case, today is the best day to start planning so you don't fall into that role. Some of us are like, we would like to help as much as possible. Maybe you don't. And whatever it is, it's good. There is not right or wrong answer in this case. What there is, the only right answer is what you're designing for yourself. And that starts with you mapping that future for yourself. So how do you start mapping that future for yourself? Because I was working with a client and I asked this question, and it was a very open question, and she had absolutely no idea. Like, you don't know what you don't know. If you don't know what you don't know, like, it's very hard to envision the future. If you were to win the lottery and win $100 million, probably you would have an idea of what to do with the money. But for the most part, probably you wouldn't have an idea of what to do with all that money. And that's the reason why a lot of the people that win the lottery end up losing all their money eventually. There are a lot of theories about that, but this might be one. Maybe you have another theory and that works too. We don't know what the caregiving journey will be for us. Every case is unique. Every family is unique. What we do know is how we want to present ourselves in those situations. There are people that are very hands-on and they have the strength and the time to do that. So if you want to, you have the time and you have the strength and the possibilities to do that, then you want to start thinking about that. The first thing is, how much time do you want to spend in the caregiving journey? Do you want it to be a full-time job, or do you want it to be just an occasional kind of job or a supporting role that even though you are there all the time, it's not you doing all the work? So that is the first topic that I would recommend, thinking about how much time you want to spend doing this caregiving role. And that depends in your life, how much time you can allocate to these additional activities. Because certainly there are other things going on in your life. And some of them you can trade for. You might be able to say, well, I can trade working full-time to working half-time. I can trade some things, but be very clear on what you're spending your time and what are the non-negotiables in your life. Are you willing to stop going out with your friends? Are you willing to stop working? Are you willing to just be a hermit with your loved one and don't go out? So in terms of time, what are you willing, and what are most importantly, what are your non-negotiables? So that is super key. What you're going to do with your time and how much time you want to allocate to your caregiving journey. Another topic that is very important is, what are the things that you are willing or not willing to do, or you want or don't want to do, or you can or you can't do. So for example, caregivers that are long distance caregivers, probably they won't be able to take their loved ones to a doctor's appointment. That's not going to be possible, because if you're living in another country or another city far away, that's going to be hard. That's another point to consider. What kind of activities you can do in your caregiving journey. Those will depend on where you live. If your location allows you to be more hands-on, Or maybe you're more of a financial POA where you're helping with the finances and making sure that everything gets paid, and you're managing in the distance appointments and that sort of thing. Or you are more in person, hands-on, doing things for your loved one. You're taking them to doctor's appointments. You're there during surgeries. You are there for them, coordinating the care and making sure that everything is happening, that they're taking their meds or that they're sleeping whatever time they have to go to sleep. I don't know. So that is another thing that you need to consider in this kind of role. So you have obviously time and the activities that need to happen. And this sort of thing needs to be evaluated on a regular basis. You need to evaluate things over time because life changes. Maybe the care requirements right now for certain are not going to be the same requirements and needs in the future. So this activity needs to happen often enough that you keep evaluating your role, and maybe things that you're willing to do right now, maybe you're not willing to do in the future. Maybe you once tried feeding your loved one and that was a full fight and you want to stop doing that. That's completely fine. But you have to keep evaluating these kinds of things. I usually love talking about 3 things at a time because that's how the brain works and learns. So the third topic that is very important is how you manage your finances. What does the money that you or your loved one currently have, what is that money going to be good for? And how much it's going to last? I'm not going to talk a lot about this topic today because financial advisor will be coming soon to the podcast to talk about money and how things that you need to consider and things you need to talk with your financial advisor, which is great. But when you're thinking about your future, it is important to know the amount of money that you're going to require and who's going to be involved in that care. So if you want a 24/7 nurse, you need to understand who's going to be able to provide that care for you and if you can afford it. I've mentioned this many times throughout the podcast. You have to match your needs to your financial reality. And if that financial reality won't allow for you to achieve whatever you want to achieve, then you have to be creative and find other ways to create those financial resources for yourself. And maybe you're saying well, I have a job and I have this income and my parents have saved money and everything is whatever way. And that's perfectly fine. You also need to consider how that reality is going to look like and if you need to change something for your caregiving journey. So when you're thinking about how you want to build that future self, what you want to accomplish, what you want that role to be and look like, you can start thinking with these 3 things. And it's very easy. You can, if you don't know how it looks like, you can go to Google and just Google search things that need to be done for a person with these conditions. And you will find so much information. But just stick with 2 or 3 articles, get an idea, and with that idea in mind, start designing what you want your caregiving journey to look like. Okay, my friend. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you haven't done so, go ahead and review this podcast. I would really appreciate you reviewing this podcast and letting us know what you think. Talk to you next week.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.